Welcome to the Indicator podcast, where we talk to people working to make monitoring and evaluation systems stronger. My guest today is Jane Davidson. She's a member of the Footprint Evaluation Initiative. Welcome, Jane. It's very nice to have you here with us.
Hi, Dugan. So great to be here. Very cool that you're starting a podcast. This is fun.
It is, hey? And I'm looking forward to having you as a repeat guest. But tonight, we're going to be talking about footprint evaluation, which is essentially a kind of practice-based change initiative that looks to help evaluators integrate environmental sustainability into all their evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
Your career has been built around the argument that evaluation needs to draw genuine evaluative conclusions. In fact, the first time I ever met you was associated with the word genuine. And we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
And this idea that people need to make real, genuine evaluative assessments is something now very integral to the Footprint Evaluation Initiative. How does Footprint connect to that longer, genuine endeavor in your career?
Yeah. So, I mean, the genuine evaluation stuff that you're probably remembering was Patricia Rogers and I started a blog once upon a time back in, it might have been 2010 or something back about then, where we started talking about various kinds of things. And this was one of the points that we made quite a lot because it was kind of something I'd been thinking about a lot in my work. So, and I think so when I started, so we met up in, after various times meeting, but we met up in 2019, I believe, at the AEA conference and had this conversation with Andy Rowe about the idea that environmental sustainability should be included in all evaluations. And basically I was kind of struck by his notion that we've been ignoring a whole universe of side impacts, and that makes evaluation invalid. So I was like, I didn't really want to let that slide. I was like, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I was intrigued. Like, tell me more, Andy. Like, what's going on? So, and then, as we got more into it, I mean, I've always been a very strong advocate for making things understandable to people who might not be content experts. And I think, particularly when you're trying to bring natural systems knowledge and environmental sustainability ideas into evaluations of programs, policies, and other initiatives that are primarily designed to help human systems, i.e. people, livelihoods, the economy, social well-being, et cetera, this kind of environmental knowledge isn't in the wheelhouse of the decision makers we're talking to. And also it wasn't particularly in my wheelhouse either. I mean, we've all probably touched on it a bit in our lives, but I wasn't super familiar with it. So I love to figure out how can we extract real clarity for people in ways that they can understand. And one of the most important ways to do that is to be super clear about not just describing a bunch of impacts, but saying very clearly how good, bad, or diabolical they are, so that decision makers are super clear about which things they need to fix first and fast. So I feel like it's a real key to actionable evaluation, like making sure that we're doing something that people can actually use and not just talking all this complicated mumbo jumbo that they don't know what to do with. You know what I mean?
In evaluation methodology basics, you lay out a rigorous framework for what sound evaluation actually requires, and it relates to what you've just been talking to about rubrics.
Yeah.
When you apply that framework to the question of coupled human and natural systems, meaning thinking of these as two systems linked in really fundamental ways, what do you think most evaluations don't get right that they should be doing as a matter of basic evaluative competence?
So, I mean, the first one is kind of what I just talked about, is like basically ignoring a big chunk of important side impacts. So,
Are you going to look here?
yeah, and I mean, we're working for a client who says, we want you to look at this. So we go and look at this, and we don't sort of think, if the client doesn't tell us to go look in that other place, we're not that good at it, honestly. And And that was where some of the ideas like, Michael Scriven's goal-free evaluation came from, was just don't tell me what the goals are. I should just go and look for all effects. So, I mean, it's kind of along those lines of just being open-minded about it. But I think also like in relation to evaluation methodology basics and that whole evaluation specific methodology, I think one thing is we haven't been asking the right kinds of questions. So, and two elements of that. One is not just saying what were the outcomes, but saying how beneficial or harmful were they and being super clear about that. And then the other thing that we're doing wrong is not asking coupled systems questions, because we're not recognizing the interlinkages among these things. So we shouldn't just be asking things like how beneficial or harmful was the program to people, communities, and the economy, but we should be saying how harmful or beneficial was it while also protecting and ideally restoring the natural systems on which these people, communities, and the economy depend. So, even like business livelihoods depend on the ability to sustainably use natural resources. And if we screw that up, we're going to screw up the economy as well. So like we need to understand how these things are linked. So, and then we need to think about, okay, in order to answer questions like that, we need to be able to grapple with stuff like how good is good? What does it look like if a change effort's helping make the right outcomes for the right people happen quickly enough in ways that work for them and that look after the natural world that they live in? So it's all kind of interconnected. If we ask the right questions, that challenges us to really think about what it means to answer those. And that's what takes us into that kind of evaluation specific methodology that I think is missing right across the board, not just in sustainability inclusive evaluation.
You've argued consistently, actually, not just in your recent book with Tacey, but you've argued consistently that the commissioning stage, the point at which an evaluation gets commissioned, is often won or lost. Like, the quality is determined well before an interview is done. What does a sustainability inclusive evaluation terms of reference look like? And what are the things that are absolutely non-negotiable if you're going to really take account of environmental sustainability?
Right. I mean, it's hard to say which are the non-negotiable,
And
because I feel like a lot of these are pieces of the jigsaw that all need to
right.
come together. So I think, one thing is explaining or making the case why environmental considerations are relevant to this particular initiative that's being evaluated. Not just for the evaluators to understand it, but I think this is important for internal buy-in to why you're including this in the evaluation scope. I think you need to understand like what the key decisions are that the evaluation is going to feed into and how the environmental component is relevant to those. I think you need to include coupled systems evaluation questions, not just human systems ones. So, and they need to be explicitly evaluative, saying like how beneficial or harmful, not just what's happening. I think here's probably one that I think is really important. Ask the people bidding on the contract, bidding for the contract, to tell you how they're going to give you an explicitly evaluative answer about whether the initiative or its outcomes are net beneficial, harmful, or neutral with respect to natural system health. And just pay particular attention to how they answer this, because that's going to make or break the evaluation. If it looks like they're just going to free associate to the question with some data and not really sort of crunch it down and say something explicit, then they're probably not the right team to hire. I think it's also important to make sure the scope, timeline, and budget are sufficient to be able to encompass this, but it's not a whole universe of stuff, but looking at least 2 or 3 important environmental issues and being able to cover them as well as your decision makers need it. And there are ways to do that pretty cheaply. One thing to think about is making sure the evaluation team has got some kind of natural systems expertise. And if they don't, how are you going to connect them with some people maybe internally who do? And also clarifying that you want the evaluation team to engage not just all the normal stakeholders that they might usually engage, but also natural systems interests. Who's going to speak for the environment as you're figuring out what the criteria are and what the evidence should be and that kind of thing. So those are a few things. I mean, some of those, I guess, for each particular evaluation, some of those are more make or break. But I think that how are you going to answer this question in a really clear way is probably the big one to go for. And then all of the other stuff feeds into that.
I mean, I don't see that much use being made. I mean, not as much use being made of rubrics as I would want there to be, right? I mean, they're not a widespread kind of evaluative tool, or should be more widespread than they are. What I think the difficulty for people with them is that they really require you to exercise your mind. Like, you've really got to have worked out what good looks like, as you say, like in real life.
Yeah. I think like one thing is, there's a lot of sort of stuff being done on evaluation anxiety. And I think we often think about that as being the client is nervous about evaluation. But honestly, I think evaluators are nervous about making such clear conclusions. It's much safer to just describe and see what's
Right.
going on, than it is to say, and this is actually pretty good or pretty bad, and then having to justify that really clear conclusion. So, I mean, you don't necessarily need rubrics for that, but what you do need is evaluative reasoning. And I mean, that's the big difference between what evaluation is and what more descriptive forms of research are. It's not just describing stuff. It's not just asking for opinions about stuff and reporting other people's opinions. It's about using all of that evidence to get to a conclusion and say, and is it any good? And how, and if it's not so good, how serious is that? And if it is good, how amazing is that? Like, really being clear about that. And I wish we'd do it more, because I think that's what's more useful to decision makers.
I mean, it's difficult to make yourself unpopular by making those kind of calls, and it's something evaluators have to be brave about.
Yeah.
I mentioned your book with Tessie Katsambas, the one focusing on evaluation management, and you've argued there and elsewhere that evaluation commissioners and managers are the hidden kind of pivot point in many evaluation systems, because they can make or break whether or not an evaluation gets used and what influence it experiences or enjoys. What do you think evaluation commissioners and managers can do to make sustainability inclusive evaluations useful and influential beyond just what the evaluation team can achieve?
Yeah, and I mean, my answer to this is probably going to be more about all kinds of evaluations, not just sustainability inclusive, because this is something I've
Sure.
been thinking about for a long time.
Right.
Like one of the key things to remember is 100% of the value of an evaluation is in its use. And highly influential evaluations create amazing light bulbs for people. And utilization savvy evaluation management can really help make that happen. So here's a few things that evaluation managers can do. Clearly identify who is it who needs to be influenced by this evaluation, especially when it comes to conceptual use. Not just, it's very easy to see who's got control of the program and has to do the management response to the recommendations or whatever. But if you think about like who, particularly at the strategic level, not just the operational level, like might need some insights from this evaluation, and think about, who's actually got decision-making power and budget control to actually change anything in a meaningful way, not just the people who are down in the weeds, right? So now quite often when you're thinking that stratospheric, you might be talking like very senior leadership, maybe even, the C-suite and the top leaders of the organization. They might be quite difficult to get involved directly in the evaluation because they're busy. I mean, that's just reality. So what you need to think about is who are the key influencers within the organization. So for those people who need to be influenced, who do they pay attention to? Who could derail the evaluation or undermine its insights if they were unconvinced about it? And then think about like who would need to be involved in order to give the evaluation political legitimacy, either because of their power and influence or because they have a right to be involved and it would be wrong to exclude them. thinking about whose expertise is needed in as part of the process in order to get the evaluative conclusions right, or for the evaluation to be credible in the eyes of decision makers. And so some of these things are going to be obvious within the organization. Other things are less obvious. In sustainability inclusive evaluation, we talk about bringing natural system interests into that. So you want to think about if you're bringing that expertise in or trying to involve people there, who is the most credible person that you could get involved, who has the ear of the people who need to be influenced. So, and also I think the other thing to think about is don't just pick a group of people to be involved and imagine that they're going to be involved from one end of the evaluation to the other. Because I kind of feel like somehow, I don't know, when I was coming up through the evaluation profession and learning about participatory approaches, that's kind of what it sounded like. You get this group and they go through the whole thing. And so I really shifted my thinking on that, thinking about, how, when, and where are we going to involve which group of people at key points in the evaluation process? Are they on the steering committee? Are they helping develop the questions? Are they helping develop the theory of change, defining what success looks like? Are they helping with the sense making? Are they going to co-present the findings with you? Are they going to work on the action planning and developing recommendations? So I think like making really judicious use of each key influencer's time, make the experience worthwhile for them, as well as making its insights credible and valuable, with all the relevant voices. I think one thing we forget to do is ask people, what are they most interested in? How much time have they got to devote? And what kind of engagement process works for them? So I think when we start tailoring it seriously, and then finally, I would say, when we use like more real-time engagement to bring the insights to people as the evaluation progresses, there's an opportunity for evaluation managers to follow up and check whether these insights are actually being influential. Like, are they rippling through to where we want them to go? And then, if not, why not? Where's it getting log jammed and why is this person not passing this on? So I think we can, sort of watch the use and influence happening in real time and take proactive steps to make it more influential. So there's a lot that evaluation managers can do to massively just squeeze all that value out of the evaluation and make it feel and be really worthwhile.
I mentioned earlier that you've done a lot of work on rubric-based evaluation systems, not just for project by project or program by program, but often, and I think most where I've kind of seen a lot of your work is at a big organization level, so like whole portfolios. What do you see as the benefit of doing that portfolio level work? Like we've been using some of the footprint tools lately to do that kind of portfolio review. What do you think the benefits of that is? And how do you think it really helps organizations wanting to develop a coupled natural human systems perspective?
So, when I talk to organizational leaders and sort of key decision makers, like a lot of the big questions they have are things like, how well are we apportioning our effort and budget across all of the different things we could do or that we could fund or whatever?
Right.
And, is that mix of initiatives that we're doing getting good enough traction to shift the systems in the way that they need to be? So, we know that like the kinds of things that most organizations are trying to grapple with are really wicked problems that with these coupled systems, complex issues, emergent outcomes, it's messy and there's lots and lots of things that need to be addressed in different parts of the system in order to try and create change. So that no single initiative is going to be able to address the whole thing. And in the same way, no initiative level evaluation is ever going to be able to answer those bigger picture, more strategic questions. So one of the most rewarding and interesting pieces of work that I've been doing with multiple organizations over the last several years is really building evaluation systems that lend themselves better to that cross-portfolio synthesis and sense-making. And so that you're getting like evaluation questions across a whole portfolio and you're figuring out how to answer those by making sure that you're commissioning and running evaluations that have got the right kinds of ingredients and insights that you actually are going to be able to synthesize and bring up to a more strategic level. And so I think we need to pull our heads out of the projects, stop doing project by project, initiative by initiative evaluation. I mean, we still got to do some of that, but we've got to think of that. These are ingredients to give us the higher level insights. It's, you can't just manage the whole by just managing the parts. Like, you've got to think of the whole as well. So, lots of organizations are very frustrated with their evaluation systems. They evaluate lots and lots of initiatives and they don't get the kind of insight that I guess they sort of thought would fall out of that. It doesn't actually happen. You got to be more purposeful with it. But at the same time, not many organizations are ready for a huge revamp of how they do that. I mean, there's been a couple of exceptions, but in general, not usually. So what I usually suggest is that organizations start with their current pain point. So, pick a portfolio where the kinds of changes you're trying to influence are nuanced and somewhat intangible. They're difficult to measure. And they're only a piece of like what you're trying to, maybe you've got multiple initiatives trying to influence those outcomes, but in quite different ways. And so, it's messy. And so usually in areas like this, there's monumental frustration about like what evaluation is not delivering. So that means that people then are more motivated to try something new because there's nothing to lose, right? They're not getting a lot out of the current approach. So if you can like create a little space where you can experiment with something new and then prove its value, that's when people can start going, oh, okay, that was getting some useful insights. Now let's see, maybe look at another portfolio or try and bring it up to multiple portfolios and think about our whole organizational strategy.
I mean, I guess in the AI era where this stuff has become so easy or apparent, like seemingly so easy, what these rubrics do offer is a kind of conceptual frame, so it's not just kind of swimming in like algorithmic good vibes, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, AI is very good at doing sort of simple stuff. And if you don't tell it to do anything more thoughtful, it will do really basic, simple stuff, the kind of stuff that is, a mistake in the evaluation space. I mean, one example is, we measure, a particular outcome come across a bunch of projects, and then we think, okay, how are we going to synthesize that up? Well, they're like, well, let's just add up the numbers of the ratings or add up the indicators or something like that. So
tally it.
Evaluators do that all the time. AI is absolutely going to do it unless you tell it not to. So one of the things about rubric design is it is not algorithmic. It's more a heuristic. And so it's basically, it's designed to mimic the way that the brain of a very experienced evaluator would work to weigh and synthesize evidence. And so it's like you're teaching AI using the rubric to use this way of thinking to look at that evidence and then synthesize it. And now you never just tell it to do it and make a rating. You tell it, and why, show me your evidence for that, which you should be doing when you ask any evaluator. You should ask your AI the same question, not just like, what's your conclusion, but what's the reasoning behind it? What is the evidence? Why are you rating it here and not one level above and not one level below? Like, what's the thing that you're seeing? And then, you can pressure test that by, you can tell the AI to be a critical friend and to find all the holes in that reasoning argument and like what evidence is missing and like what would a critic say. So that's a great way to pressure test your findings and then go, oh, did we miss something? Are we overweighting some of the evidence, underweighting some other things? Like, what's going on?
That pressure testing is so dull after the thrill of just watching the AI churn out these incredible conclusions. Now you actually have to go and check that it's not just lying. And
I know, but AI hallucinates all the time. So you've got to make sure that AI is not high when it's telling you what it's telling you. You just like, okay, exactly. Now sober up and tell me if that was real.
So one of the things you've written about as a kind of core organizational capability is this idea of evaluative thinking, which, as you've kind of mentioned today as the core thing that an evaluation needs to be able to do is draw an evaluative conclusion. And you've written about that this gets built over time through culture and practice, and not just through training. And I always add also through leadership. Like, really, you
Mm.
need a leadership that is interested in evaluative reasoning. If one was to take a footprint evaluation initiative approach and apply that sort of thinking, and it was like genuinely embedded in an organization, and the way that organization thinks about itself and its work, what would that look like? And how would one go about building it? So how would one like really hardwire in a footprint sensibility in an organization's thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this reminds me of something like way back in grad school, one of my professors used to talk about, it used to talk about something called the Great Training Robbery. So organizations spend massive amounts of funds on training, and they tend to think that you put people through a training course and miraculously the whole way that everybody does stuff is going to change. And then they wonder why that doesn't work. So there's a few. So I think, like we do need like capacity development efforts. So like whether that's, workshops or learning experiences of some description, like that's really important to build the muscle that you need to be able to do this kind of evaluative reasoning, or sustainability, inclusive evaluation, all of it. So you can kick off with starting to build some capacity like that. I think like the next obvious step is to pay really close attention to what we call transfer of training. So you build the skills, but then you need to be able to apply it. So something that really helps get value out of the training is to add on to a workshop, give like each evaluation team a certain number of hours with an expert to help them guide them through applying the principles through a real live evaluation, so they can get the opportunity to ask questions about, how to do this when it gets to the real stuff, because that's too hard to figure out when you're sitting in a little training workshop and trying to imagine yourself back at base doing stuff. It's often messier when you can start rolling your sleeves up. So that practice helps make the change stick. But then another big issue is thinking about organizational systems and structures. Like if you ask people to do things differently, and even if you support them to start implementing this stuff differently, they're still operating within systems and structures that are designed for the old way of doing things, which makes it very easy for them to slip back. So if you're thinking sustainability inclusive evaluation, for example, and you're contracting with evaluators to do evaluations, you want to make sure that your whole commissioning structures and the way that you design your utilization of evaluation processes and how you make that happen are all conducive to that kind of approach, and that aren't just going to take you back to the old way of thinking. So, things like, in sustainability inclusive evaluation, we think about stuff like, reporting templates or your generic evaluation questions that you tend to ask in each evaluation, or what the criteria are when you're commissioning teams, or like kind of who gets involved when you make sense of the evaluation and start thinking about how to apply some of the insights. So I think bottom line is, don't expect a one-shot training exercise or publishing a guidance document to just do it for you, but just think about all of the things that would stop people from doing it this different way, and that would be pushing them back to the previous limited way of doing things. You want to, when you change these system structures and the ways people do things, like at every level, that's what makes the change not just stick, but it becomes irreversible and it becomes business as usual.
Um, yeah, I mean that's the real challenge, right? Is to kind of sustain change over time.
Yeah.
You've been an honest critic of initiatives that come with excellent ideas and frameworks, but don't really change practice. What do you think leaders and kind of managers in evaluation entities should be doing to make the kind of shift you're talking about to integrate sustainability inclusive evaluation? What would they need to be doing differently now?
I mean, I think every organization's different, and you're dealing with, you've got different size, budget issues, you've got organizational politics, you've got, some of them have got very long histories of the way we do things around here, and others are a little bit more fluid and organic. So you've really got to fit how you're going to approach this to what's the context you're in. And I guess my advice for most settings is just start off with a bite-sized effort that works for where your organization is at. And as I said before, start by maybe addressing something that everybody agrees is frustratingly bad, and find some ways you can do something about it. Document what works, show that it's worth doing, and then just build from there. I think it's also important to not be trying to do this as the Lone Ranger solo, trying to change a whole organization. I mean, you've got to pull together a critical mass of internal champions, including at least one or two people who are very senior and have got the ear of anybody who might be able to pull the plug on this. So, and just get the senior people to back your change champions to really take it to the next level and keep building, as soon as and to help socialize the successes for you, that kind of thing. I think one thing that every organization could very smartly do, and it's not too hard, is to make your next evaluation team hire somebody with natural systems expertise. You would be amazed how many people we've talked to out there who said, oh yeah, I do actually have a minor in this, or I have my other degree is in that, but I've never been asked to use it. They're sitting,
I was a geology major. Yeah.
Right? I mean, back in the past, I did chemistry and studied like like atmospheric chemistry and all that
Not
stuff.
me.
So,
I was always a words person.
But I mean, it's just like there's huge numbers of evaluators like that have come out of the woodwork when we started talking about this stuff and footprint evaluation, who have all this expertise already. So it's not like you have to hire somebody with natural systems expertise instead of an evaluator. You hire a good evaluator who's also got that. And I think probably lastly, really connect with other organizations that are on the same journey. It's really easy to lose energy if you feel like you're all alone in this, and particularly if your leadership feels like you're doing something that nobody else is doing. So you've got to create that sense that this is, help people understand this is a movement. You're part of a bigger movement. This is inevitable. It's happening. And we're going to be one of the front runners instead of one of the laggards. Why not?
I was looking at an email Patricia sent recently where she was talking about like sustainability inclusive evaluation as being like swimming lessons, like learning how to swim. Yeah. And if you know that you're going to be thrown in the water, then start to learn to swim now rather than later. And I think that's very true.
Right. Yeah.
So we're kind of done with my questions, but any last thoughts on footprint, on sustainability inclusive evaluation you want to mention? And we can end now and lose this bit. So any thoughts?
I think like when we first started talking to people about footprint evaluation, I guess, some people were looking at us a bit sideways and wondering, what are you on about? I think a lot of people thought that this is something that was going to push out other considerations, and a major concern is that it might push out something like gender and equity concerns, kind of indigenous perspectives and so forth. Okay. And I think the recent Canadian Evaluation Society conference, one thing that was really clear there, they had a fantastic keynote who was an Indigenous climate activist, and she spoke very clearly about the links between particularly Indigenous well-being, not just in a sort of psychological, emotional and cultural sense, but also like thriving livelihoods and everything like that, as being very closely linked to the land. And, kind of this idea that the land is a relative not of yours, not like a resource to be tapped into. It's something to be looked after carefully. So, and this is one of the places that we look to for a lot of inspiration, actually, is Indigenous evaluation frameworks, because they already understand this coupled system stuff. I was really excited in Canada as well to see some folks talking about Made in Africa evaluation, which is another...
Which is happening today, actually. There's this big event in Durban. Yes, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So, I mean, that's another example of like a great framework that brings this in like it's normal, which it should be. So I don't want us to see this as a zero-sum game. This is, and also the other thing is, I think in Footprint, one of the things we've been thinking about is what can we learn from the journey of gender and equity and how they ended up infused into evaluation as a matter of course. Like back in the bad old days, like 30 years ago, you'd say, oh, what about gender in this evaluation? And people go, oh, this is not one of those women's programs. And you go, oh, what about
justice?
Equity? Oh, this is not one of those cultural programs. We're not doing that. So but how did they get that? How did the crusaders for gender equity and Indigenous approaches get these considerations built into every evaluation? They didn't ask for permission up front. They just slipped it in and said, well, obviously you want to know about this, right? And so you just don't apologize, just slip it in. And, that's kind of the approach that I think we're trying to go for with footprint evaluation is, connect like environmental considerations with equity, connect it with whatever matters most for the evaluation, show how they're intertwined and slip it in. Don't sort of go spending 90% of the evaluation on it, but just explain 2 or 3 things really well and create some light bulb moments for people. Eventually they'll start paying attention. And one day we hope to have got to the point where gender and equity have got to now, where nobody says, oh, we don't need to look at equity, do they?
Well, I think some people do, but let's hope not many.
Yeah, like we could at least know, even if those people do, we can at least look at them like they're weirdos, right?
Yeah, they're the weirdos.
They're the weirdos now. So they used to look at us like we were the weirdos for saying you should include it, but now
I guess we kind of shifting the norm, right?
Yeah. So it's just like, these things don't need a crowd. You've got to right size the sustainability of components so it doesn't swamp everything else, obviously. But, there's always something, and it's not just about whether you're using plastic coffee cups or something like that. There's interesting connections that are more than what you might think. And so you just go exploring a little bit, you pop a couple of things in there and people go, oh, I never thought of it like that. And that's what makes evaluation interesting to people.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I wish you a very, very nice Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Dugan.